here's a quick screen recording. I'm just going to run through this. You can see these tour helicopters taking off. Those three little dots are going up the strip. They're going to loop around. They come back down, and then bam, that is the loss of the transponder signal. Here's another loss of transponder signal. And then here's the third loss of transponder signal. That's a very curious event to happen on such a pivotal day. And this, you may never have seen that. I took the high-def video and I slowed it down to 0.25 speed and looked at the airspace. And in that airspace, you see these kind of curious optical anomalies, these flashes of light coming from the airspace. And so the first question, of course, is, well, what is that? Is it an artifact of the image, or is it something that's really there? Firearm muzzle flash is a regular reddish, white, or yellow. Navigation lights are going to be red, green, or splashing white, like a strobe light. And so none of that is consistent with what we observed. It is most consistent with suppressed muzzle flash. Suppressed muzzle flash is actually much brighter than unsuppressed muzzle flash when viewed from the line of fire. This is what a transponder route should look like along the strip. You know, it comes up towards the strip, comes back. This is what many of the paths look like. There's a break, then the shooting occurs, and then about 20-30 minutes later, that same aircraft takes off again from McCarran and then has another side route. FAA and wrote an appeal, and I explained to them all the ways in which they should have the records of those helicopters. And one curious thing about this response that I got, it was given by a gentleman named Michael Harvest. And what's curious about that is that he'd been with the FAA for a long time, so long, in fact, that he was actually involved in tracking Flight 93 in 2001, if you can believe that. So this gentleman should have known that the FAA had those records. And it was strange that he was the one that authored the response. Just leave that there. In the appeal to FAA, I cited all of the regulations and procedures of publishing the redacted FOIA requests. And as this user indicates, it appears that we might have fleshed out some more whistleblowers. So I wondered if we could see the helicopters in question to turn their transponders off with closed-circuit television. So I asked the Nevada Department of Transportation to please release the footage that they take from the closed-circuit TVs of the interstates. And wouldn't you know it, of all of the cameras in the Las Vegas area, there were only 2 that were offline that night for no good reason. And one of those 2...
10:16 p.m. is the last time Stephen Paddock was alive. After 2 single shots from a pistol. From a pistol, that's what we're told.
There were 2 percussive sounds coming from that room. There were 2 broken windows. My conjecture is that sounds were probably the windows being blown out after the shooting was over. So if we talk about the distance of these shots, we've got approximately 330 yards to the venue, 700 to go back in the airspace, maybe even 900 depending on where shots are going. When we talk about thinking that was from echoes, and so we need to be reminded that echoes don't change the rate of fire only the pitch. So it was impossible that those overlapping rates were not 2 different shooters, or at least 2 different guns, or 2 different sources of the audio. I reached out to an attorney who had litigated a number of matters for people, you know, on behalf of issues related to the U.S. government. And so this gentleman, my recollection is that he made the claim that they had not proved a single person was hit or injured by a single weapon recovered from it. And I think as you've seen, all the bumps.
Pointing this out, I'm stunned by that, of course, but not surprised.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And it was unbelievable to a number of people. And they wrote about it. And so it was covered in Unilab, it was covered on Snopes. And It was my recollection that shortly after that 4chan post kind of started to percolate in public conversation, this story dropped out of the news cycle. There were no more pushes for body scanner tag. There was no more discussion of the shooting. It was like it never happened. You would have anniversary reports and other things, but that was the extent of it. Insider trading was revealed, so that was interesting. And there was a number of short sales on the MGM stock that was anomalous, so that was another feature. And then this was curious, this is interesting for the public to understand. I made an effort to put some of this information on Wikipedia, and I understood that if I just put it as an explanation of what happened, it was likely going to be removed. So I checked the theory world to try to explain what had happened. And my conjecture is that this ridiculous story is actually probably also been pushed to our intelligence committees in the Congress and the Senate. And that they don't have enough of the true fact pattern to understand that they're being lied to. And if they are approached by members of the public saying, hey, what happened in Vegas doesn't mesh with the story that we're told, that their own internal conversations have been steered, somebody has steered them into thinking that this is some national security event related to Saudis, and so therefore they're not going to look into it. That's conjecture on my part, but it wouldn't surprise me. One of the pieces of information that has led many in the research community to think that maybe there's this exfil going on is that on Flight Radar 24, there is a GPS mismatch between the Southwest flight location, where it's localized on the screen, and where it actually is. And it makes it look as though this plane lands on top of the Mandalay Bay. And so in the exceptional documentary by Rob, channel that it links to, did have some interesting comments from the public. Free speech, folks. We need discourse. We can learn a lot from listening to one another. And so that's a veteran discussing the fact that the optical signature is clearly muzzle flash. And then I thought this was pretty good too, because with respect to whether or not it was an exfil or something related to the Saudis versus whether it was this body scanner tech profiteering endeavor, the 4chan release as well as the insider trading all happened several weeks before the event, whereas Al-Walid's invite to MBS, it should read MBS, was only 1 week before the shooting. So I think on its face, the notion that there was some sort of clearance exfil thing is ridiculous. Well, why would it make any sense to have a shooter in a room firing away at tens of thousands of people to create a distraction for something? I think it fails on many fronts. And so let's talk about the investigation. So there were efforts made to reach out to our public officials and professionals to try to get some answers. In that audio, he's discussing Barr as an accomplice in the drug trafficking operation in the United States, the whole MENA connection, the importation of cocaine into Arkansas. He singles out Barr, Clinton, Noriega, Bush. It's the same cast of characters over and over again. This book was published in the late 90s, long before Barr ever returned to office. And so that was sort of a Rosetta Stone for me, to understand why it is that so many things are not resolved. It appears as though an American cartel has seized power, or at least had seized power, and is potentially blocking many, many things that should otherwise be readily resolved.
If you, Xander, had to sort of describe and maybe sum up what you think actually happened, piecing all of these things together, I always look at sort of Occam's razor. It usually always comes back to money and power, right?
These committees where we can hopefully initiate some sort of response, to have folks look into it. I think it does make sense. I think the insider trading, I think the reveal from the 4chan post has too much specificity to be ignored. So to me, yeah, it does make sense, but I can't say unequivocally that that's exactly what happened. I just know that the information that's out there cannot be true. It cannot be true that Paddock did that shooting.
Who do you think inside those rooms was carrying out those shots? Ballistics data, autopsies. Does it seem like it was a group of individuals, a paramilitary group? Do you have any sense of what it might be?
Well, whoever did it would have had to have had control of the security of the hotel. Those hotels are riddled with cameras. Every floor, every elevator, they likely staged this sniper's nest, had that all ready to go, shot from wherever else they shot from, which could have also been from other locations other than aircraft. I'm not saying exclusively aircraft, but the evidence does seem to point that aircraft was used. And then when the time was right, they reached the door and thought that they had the story all, spelled out. But yeah, all lined up. So I want to talk about just a couple more things, and then I'll wrap up the slideshow. Okay?
Sure.
In this video here, we're going to see a DEA agent discussing the fact that he realized in his war on drugs, the CIA had actually infiltrated the DEA in the 80s.
We didn't know that at the time that a lot of the so-called DEA people that were running to the DEA were CIA.
Reach out to these committees. Anybody who might have additional information, reach out to folks in these committees. I'll share with you that I reached out to these committees, but they do not care. But I'm just a smart guy who paid attention, and perhaps somebody with a stronger set of credentials might elicit a response. Maybe somebody watching this interview, this presentation, may know somebody who knows somebody who might care to get something done. Maybe this new administration will get something done. These are all unknown questions at this point. But for anybody that might be a whistleblower, this is just a reminder that you are protected and you can speak about this stuff without fear of reprisal. And so I would encourage the public, if you're a medical professional, I don't know if he volunteered or was chosen. He was certainly involved in some manner. I mean, we do have the footage of him entering the hotel, bringing the weapons up, being in the hotel. What's interesting is we don't have a continuous time stream of what happened. They just released little snapshots, just enough to show us that, yeah, hey, he was there. But he probably had a history of working, in some sort of clandestine or, illicit operations. And, I try to envision what it's like on the other side. I mean, if I were doing something like this, I'd make a proposal, like, we'll pay X amount of dollars, and, we're gonna take care of you when it's done, and, talk them into doing it, and then make sure nobody ever sees them again. Has to be reconciling these things that are so obviously wrong, so obviously lies, and yes, I think evil is an appropriate word, and perhaps justice is what is needed, but even if we cannot get there, perhaps a Truth and Reconciliation Committee could, help to unravel a lot of this, help to kind of just to breathe the wound so that we could at least move forward in some way where we're not further inundated with these kinds of atrocities. If that was my role in really getting involved in the Vegas shooting, I spent so many years with respect to 9/11 truth, that like, the Vegas shooting was perhaps a side run. We could maybe get some answers into some resolution to that. And what I learned is that, just how deeply broken this is really. So it is my hope that